Hi everyone, happy OT week for 2025. I'm Claire Batkin from Your OT Tutor, and we're kicking things off with a webinar that focuses on what good OT looks like and how you can improve your skills in 8 different areas to become a better OT who loves what you do. So we're going to go through the framework that I use to teach OTs in my CPD memberships and in all my courses too. And that framework is called the Foundations of OT Success. So I've got a nice diagram to show you later to help any of those visual learners, lots of practical examples and some free resources as well so you can have a go at seeing if they're helpful for your own learning straight away. But there's lots to get through, so let's dive right in. Before we go any further, though, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the Quandamooka people, who are the traditional custodians of the lands, winds, and waters where I'm situated to record this session for you today. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be watching this recording. Some learning objectives for you to think about. So hopefully by the end, you'll be able to understand how the foundations of OT success can help you to become a better OT who loves what you do. You'll be able to identify how using these foundations can improve your client outcomes. Become aware of a range of resources and supports that will help you to develop these foundational skills as a bit of a taster, and then hopefully get you thinking about reflecting on your own strengths and experiences, and maybe start to put together an action plan with some steps towards building your own foundational OT skills. So a little bit of a plan for the session. There'll be some introductions to myself and to the Foundations of OT Success framework. And then we're going to go through each foundation one at a time. And I'll give you a sort of a practical example of what your practice might look like if parts of that foundation are missing, an example of what good would look like if you really work on developing that particular foundational skill. And the try this will be one of my resources. So there'll be some free ones and some examples of what comes up in my paid memberships if you'd actually like to develop that skill or that foundational area a little bit further. I'll wrap up by telling you a little bit more about those paid memberships and where you can ask me questions or get in touch, but let's get started. So first of all, just a little bit about me. I graduated in 2008 with first class honours and a university medal. So I've been a proud OT nerd for a long time. And basically my focus at the moment is try to put together some professional development for other OTs that's simple, practical, and worth it. So when I'm doing that, I'm drawing on my experience being an OT for about 16 years now, and I've worked across both public and private sectors in inpatient hospital type settings and community roles as well. And my most recent case that I'm currently doing is within the private sector here in Australia for the NDIS. And I've actually done some medico-legal sort of independent assessments within that funding system as well. I've presented my work at national and international levels, at conferences, and I also currently work as a sessional academic for one of the universities here in Australia, which makes it easier for me to see exactly what students are learning at uni, what their questions are, and what they're struggling with when they actually graduate and need to connect the dots between being that uni student and now being a real life OT. And I've found that sometimes a lot of those gaps or the help that they're needing is really focused on these foundational core OT skills. And even for OTs that have been working for a little bit, sometimes we get sucked into sort of just trying to find the quick hacks to deal with all these systems that often have lots of challenges. And sometimes we forget about these core OT skills or don't really give them as much attention as developing sort of our knowledge of some of the systems. So that's where Your OT Tutor came from. And I launched that back in 2022 with some courses, and now it's evolved and there's lots of online courses, there's CPD memberships with live sessions and on-demand content. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. Personally, I'm a bit of a night owl, mum to 2 kids that believe sleep is for the weak. So often I do my work in the middle of the night when it's quiet. So if you do ever reach out and you get a random email back in the middle of the night, that's pretty much just how I roll. But let's dive into a little bit more about the foundations of OT success. So what are they all about? And this is your beautiful visual image for any of those visual learners out there. So how I describe it is that it's the core professional and clinical skills that you need to be happy, competent, and confident as an OT. So there's 8 different frameworks there. They are numbered, but you don't necessarily need to work through each of those foundations in a step-by-step order because they do interact with each other and build on each other in different ways. What I will say though is that number 1 in the middle is empower yourself. And if it's something that you're not really prioritizing or there's gaps, which I'll give you an example of straight away next when we unpack that foundation a little bit more, that is something that really probably needs to be a bit of priority to start with, because if you don't have the time, the headspace, and the clarity in terms of what you're looking for as an OT, in your role for that role satisfaction and what makes you feel like you're doing good work, then it's harder to focus on all these other foundations, which I'll tell you about as well. So this framework has only been around for not quite 2 years. So I'm recording this in October 2025. So it wasn't in existence when I first launched Your OT Tutor. I didn't really have a set plan for what I wanted to teach or how I wanted to teach it. I just really wanted to fill some of those gaps that I was seeing in the OT world. And one of the first areas I saw the need for was in the NDIS, this private sector. So there were other webinars out there for working in this area for some of the different services that OTs would provide. But I was finding that many of them were focusing just on the tips and tricks for the NDIS itself, such as this is the type of report that you need to write for this circumstance, and these are the assessments that the NDIS likes, which was fine for me as an experienced OT because I knew those underlying OT processes and the clinical reasoning that was leading to the OTs giving those webinars saying those things. But I was realizing that many of the early career OTs weren't really getting these sort of foundational OT knowledge taught alongside these tips and tricks and hacks. Often they were working as solo OTs with minimal support, and it was just their learning was focused on survival and the quick things. And some of these core OT skills weren't really being explained or taught to them the same way that maybe 10, 15 years ago that many of us early career OTs would have been taught with really close supervision, lots of shadowing and things like that. So when I built my first course, which was the OT Guide to Completing an FCA or Functional Capacity Assessment, I built it with these actually core skills in mind to try and fill those gaps. So there was a step-by-step process, starting with being really clear on the purpose of your assessment. The information gathering spoke about the importance of asking more than just questions and choosing standardized assessments that were appropriate for your client and that they would add value to the point that you were actually trying to make in your report, rather than just this is the three assessments that the NDIS will be looking for. So without even knowing it, I was already building what would become these foundations of OT success into my courses. And then fast forward about a year, I decided to launch a membership to help OTs really focus on the core OT skills, because if anything, then the need for this seemed to be becoming even stronger as the funding systems that we were working in were becoming more challenging. So after a few days of post-it notes, texters, and taking up a lot of floor space, I came up with this framework that I now call the Foundations of OT Success. So my goal is to make sure that OTs weren't getting sidetracked from being good OTs first by looking for shortcuts and hacks in these broken systems. And my belief is that if we do the good OT skills first, like solid processes, clinical reasoning, it makes it easier to do good work even when we're working in broken, challenging systems. So when we go back to core OT processes and skills and clinical reasoning as a starting point, rather than jumping straight to the quick hats and the sort of shortcuts and the answers, that's when you'll start to recognize your value again as an OT. And then also when those around us will start to recognize exactly the quality of work and the expertise that go into doing OT and making the recommendations that we make. So when I created my memberships, the goal is to help OTs build these foundational skills into their everyday practice by making them think about them and learn about them in a way that was as easy as possible. So I'll tell you more about the memberships at the end, but let's start by talking a little bit more about the foundations one at a time. Okay, so number one is called Empower Yourself. And this is where you basically consider your own needs first. And it's not necessarily something that OTs are good at doing, but it involves things like engaging in self-reflection and supervision, setting impactful CPD goals, building your resilience, and then also navigating career progression so that your passion for learning and professional fulfillment really remains central to your OT experience. So as I go through each of these foundations, I'll share a few stories as well, just to help you really visualize what the differences might be from when these foundations are missing from your practice and when you can make an effort to actually build them into what you're doing. So the first story is, imagine that you're an OT working in a pediatric clinic in the private sector. You're dreading Mondays because your work doesn't really light you up anymore. So maybe the system you're working in seems broken. You don't feel your OT expertise are appreciated, and the families that you're working with see you only as a letter writer or a person who can get them stuff while maybe playing with their kids once per week. And those that do seem to care and know that you're trying your best seem to be the ones that are hit hardest with funding. So the whole system just doesn't seem fair and it doesn't make sense. So you show up every day, but you're not really sure where your career is heading either. There's so much noise that you don't really even have any clear headspace to think about what the problem is and why you're not really happy in your role. And is it more than just the broken systems? your supervisor seems stressed and has cancelled your last two scheduled supervision sessions, and your employer says things like, oh, that's hard, keep trying to get that billable target. So, the focus is on the billables, or that's tough that their funding is running low, but just do as much as you can before the other allied health clinicians use all the funding up. So it doesn't just really seem to align with your values. So if any of that has resonated with you, the result that you might see is that your role doesn't really match your values. So that can be part of the reason why it's not just the system itself, but the way that maybe your employer is handling the system and your role within it can make a really big difference as well. When we're working in systems that are difficult, challenging situations, at least if we have an employer who we know has our back and seems to be aligned with what we feel is most important and the choices that we're making in terms of how we're actually delivering services, that can make it something that you can actually cope with. When that alignment's not there, it's really hard to turn up to work each day. The other thing that can help you cope when sort of things are challenging, and times are always changing, there'll be times that are more challenging than others. But if you always have something to look forward to in terms of your own career progression, whether it's just in the next 6 months, some courses that you wanted to do, but even bigger picture, like where you want to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it can help you get through these tough times. Because you can say, yes, if I put in the effort now, if I do this while I'm still working through the tough times, I know I'll be coming out the other side and there'll be something better ahead. So that's what this foundation is all about, is making sure that you're really clear on what your values are, that you choose employers that actually align with those values, and that you're always thinking about your own learning and growth. So when you're doing that, what good can look like is that you actually become an OT that actually likes telling people that you're an OT again, because you actually really appreciate the value that you can deliver to your clients. Because as we go through the rest of the foundations, you'll see that it's not just about delivering shortcuts and tricks and ticking boxes. If you're really clear on the depth of what you're doing that's going into your clinical reasoning and you can share that with your clients, then hopefully they'll start to realize the value of what you're offering as well. And once they can see it and you can feel it as well, then that job satisfaction does become a little bit easier. This also looks good if you've found a workplace that feels like a really good fit. And sometimes that's really hard because we think, yep, not happy, it must just be this, and don't really think about what the issue truly is, or if there is more than one contributing factor. And we just jump ship, go to a new job without really thinking it through. And surprise, in a few months' time, we're back at square one feeling the same way. So if you can take the time to actually really think about your values, the priorities in your workplace, take the time to really question some of the workplaces before you sign up, then that can also help you as well. And ideally, where I want this foundation to set the scene is that you actually get excited about wanting to be a good OT and upskill in those core OT skills as well. Sometimes I think we feel guilty that we're making time to do CPD that we actually want to do, rather than just the CPD that we have to do to keep up to date with all the changes and things like that are happening. So I think if you can make time for that, particularly CPD that's going to fit into your long-term career goals, then that can really help you just get that career fulfillment as well. So in terms of the try, there's something that might be helpful for you. So there's always a freebie. If you're somebody that's maybe in a workplace where you're thinking like the values don't align, you can jump onto my learning library and you can access a webinar and a free workbook, which is choosing the right job for me, which will actually help you take that pause that I was talking about and think about, okay, it's not just the employer, it's not just the NDIS, it's not just the public hospital system. What exactly is it that I need to be looking for in my next job so that I feel more fulfilled? So it goes through some of those things, bit of a step-by-step process. I like step-by-step processes to reflect on what you like and don't like and what are your priorities. And then also, once you're clear on that, how you can maybe take some action to find the right employer. And then also some tips for actually choosing the employer and maybe even interviewing them a little bit so that you know that you're making the right decision in terms of what support they can deliver and really what their values are. Now, if you wanted to go further and actually become one of the paid members, what you can access is all members get a free 30-minute chat with me. So we can actually talk through maybe some of those things that you're concerned about with your workplace, or maybe some bigger CPD goals. If you actually wanted a dedicated session, if you haven't really had the opportunity in your workplace to actually sit down and spend an hour mapping out where do I want my career to go, what sort of CPD should I be focusing on the next 12 months or bigger picture things, then you can actually access a discounted CPD planning session with me where I actually help you go through that and try to get a little bit more clarity around that. Next one is to think like an OT. And basically, what I say here is this is where you're kickstarting your OT brain and you're trying to set it to autopilot. So you're unleashing the power of thinking like an OT by using those OT models, processes, frameworks, and principles to guide a really client-centered, holistic approach to your practice. And I know sometimes once OT students finish uni, they're like, that never want to think about models again. And you might even see in practice that it's not very often that experienced OTs are actually physically pulling out a model or explicitly referring to it. But the whole idea is that until that's really set into your way of practicing and really is functioning on autopilot, we need to be a little bit more intentional about how we're using them to guide our practices and our clinical decision making, because it really does make a difference to the quality of the work that we can provide. So when it's missing, the story could be something like you receive a self-referral from a new NDIS client who would like you to write a letter for an item that you know is probably not likely to be actually approved. You say, sorry, NDIS won't fund that, and you just think, okay, not worth it, I won't accept the referral, and that's kind of it. Basically, if you're practicing in this way, you're not really using this foundational skill at all. Your reaction to that sort of just write me a letter request just becomes a simple yes or no. If you do choose yes, then your reasoning is actually a little bit unclear because maybe you're just like, okay, they want the letter for the recliner chair. Let's go straight to organize a trial and then I can start writing it up. But you've actually skipped all the steps at the start where you're identifying what was the functional issue that we were trying to overcome. Was jumping to the recliner chair actually what I needed to do? Or was it actually just reviewing their transfers and looking at the way that their environment is set up? Because you've just gone straight to midway through the OT process in terms of let's just start trying some things to implement, it really makes it hard for your clinical reasoning. And that's why it's so important to have a set process, use some of our OT processes to really guide your practice. And I think because we do sometimes, if we say, yep, I can write that letter, and we don't really unpack all the decision making that we've go through for us to feel confident that, yes, this is the right decision to make, we're missing the opportunity actually to show the value of OT to our clients as well. So they just will continue to see us as just letter writers because in their eyes, they put in a request, yep, we went and did it, tick, they got what they requested. Whereas, and for the ones where we think that the NDIS is going to say, no, we're not going to get that approved, and we just say, no, don't accept the referral, we're actually missing the opportunity to show them how OT could have helped in a way that was more than just writing a letter and ticking a box. We could have said, let's go back to actually exploring what the issue is and starting there. And I suppose that's what good looks like, is when you're actually starting to use those OT models and frameworks on that autopilot, and that's your default approach. Isn't just yes, no, let's start midway through. The process is the quickest way to get the solution. We go back to the start. And even if you think that's time consuming, no one's got time for that. Sometimes it doesn't need to take hours of work. It might just be those few seconds or minutes where you're actually making sure that you've thought through those first initial steps. Like in that sort of the green model there, the Canadian practice process framework is one that I like. Basically, you could actually go back and say, okay, you can accept the referral and you manage their expectations around what the current NDIS processes are. And you actually offer to not just write the letter and do the trials, but to explore the functional issue that they were having difficulty with in the first place. Because sometimes there could actually be a different solution that if the NDIS says no to what they're currently thinking will work, at least we'll have some other backup options that we can think about. And when we do it that way, hopefully we will find a solution that will actually not just tick the box that yes, they got what they wanted, but that we've actually recommended something that will solve the functional issue that they had in the first place. Even if when they come to you with that referral, they're not really clear what that is, that's the value of OT when we actually practice in a OT-centered way using our models and our frameworks, is that we can actually identify that and help our clients to understand that. So when you're doing that, like I say, you're starting with that occupationally focused issue because you're going through step by step of knowing what the issue is and then working out what you're going to do about it. You can usually set goals that are more realistic and you know that you need to measure them in some way to know that you can prove that value. And like I just said, yeah, you can explain to your clients and they can actually see the value in what you're doing because you're not just jumping in and ticking the box for them. You've explained the process. They can see that, well, yeah, I couldn't have really done this myself and got the right outcome unless I had that OT and her expertise. And then when your clients are seeing that, then you can start to see the value again as well. And we stop seeing ourselves as just the letter writers because we keep telling ourselves that's what we are because that's all we're hearing, then that's what we'll think. But if we can reframe how we practice, then hopefully we'll appreciate our value again too. So the try this things, the freebie option, if that sort of scenario of the just write me a letter comes up in your caseload, then it might be something that you're interested in exploring a little bit more. So I actually did a conference style presentation, which you can actually watch in the learning library, about how I would actually tackle this scenario using the Canadian practice process framework. So one of those really OT processes to handle a situation like that. Whereas if you're one of my members, then you don't just get content from me. Sometimes I'll often get like guest presenters come in and share their expertise. So for this foundational skill, I actually have an on-demand workshop on the core approach with Dr. Robert Piera, who that's sort of another whole new sort of OT sort of framework way of thinking. And we've even got some examples of how we can do that sort of thinking, even within challenging systems like the NDIS and other settings where there's things that sort of hold us back from what we think we can achieve as OTs. So have a look at that if you're interested. That recording is part of the Alliance membership. The next foundation is to be a proud OT nerd. So this is where you're diving into the world of evidence-based practice. You're learning the art of blending not just that research evidence, but also client values, resource considerations, and your own personal expertise, so you can come up with the optimal therapeutic approach. So it's really just understanding that evidence-based practice isn't just research evidence, but it's combining it with all those other three factors. So when it's actually missing from our practice, this is a typical situation. So you could be a rural OT working with aged care clients in the community, and a community nurse asks you to go and prescribe a ROHO cushion for your client that you've just started to work with because they've got a grade 1 sacral pressure area. From your uni days, you're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that the current clinical practice guidelines recommend an air cushion for someone who's at higher risk of pressure injury. So yeah, I'll just jump straight to organising that loan. Maybe you go drop it off the next visit. Problem is, when you go back 2 weeks later, they've just gone back to using their old foam cushion. They didn't like the ROHO. So in this example, we've maybe just thought about, okay, the research evidence, and maybe our clinical expertise is that, oh, yeah, we know how to set up a ROHO, we'll go ahead and do that. But we need to actually really think about the 4 pillars, and I'll tell you on the next slide what that might involve. And sometimes what we actually do is we fall into the trap of just doing things the way that we've always done it, when we're not actually using all 4 pillars and really thinking about sort of the evidence-based approach to what we're doing. That's what it looks like. You can't really explain if someone says, oh, okay, why did you choose that? You can't really explain why you went for that other than, oh no, we just know it works well usually. You want to be able to really unpack and explain that you've thought about the 4 different pillars of evidence-based practice, and that will actually help you have confidence that what you're recommending will actually work. What good could look like. So this is where you're actually understanding the why behind your recommendations. And from an evidence-based practice point of view, it's those 4 different pillars. So if we go back to our scenario, first of all, do you know the research? So not just knowing what the research is saying, but also whether it applies to your client's situation or not. So in this case, we know, yep, grade 1 pressure area, definitely we need something that's high pressure relief, and air is one of the gold standard for having the highest pressure relief. But maybe we also know from the research that sometimes gel alternatives or other different sorts of different materials out there now, coupled with maybe changes to their routine and where how often they're actually sitting on that area, can actually work too and be just as effective. You also need to think about your skill level. So in this case, yep, you know how to set up ROHOs, you're confident to do it, so that's okay. But maybe if you're not feeling confident, that would be another reason why you wouldn't just go ahead and maybe implement a ROHO cushion, because things can go wrong if it's actually not set up properly. We also need to consider the reality of the practice setting. So if you can only go back and visit your client once per week versus maybe being on a hospital ward where you're able to go in and check daily that it is actually set up to the right inflation level, then that could really impact your choices. If you don't have the time to be checking in yourself or to be regularly checking in and making sure that carers are checking the cushion inflation, then it actually could be a recipe for disaster. So you really need to rethink. Yes, the research evidence says that air is best, but is it going to be best for your client's particular situation and your ability to monitor it? And that sort of takes us to the last point there, is what works for your client as well. Research evidence is just one piece of the puzzle. So we need to think about, in this case, if otherwise the ROHO would have been a good choice if we were able to monitor it regularly, is that going to be the case if we're not there? And it could be that the client either has cognitive impairment and isn't able to monitor it themselves and to alert carers when it doesn't feel the same. Are carers really stressed and under the pump, or maybe have their own learning difficulties and really struggle to actually know how to get that ROHO to the right level? So if that's the case, then what we're actually looking for is what's the best compromise. We think, okay, what is the best scenario that we can come up with in terms of what's available to us that we can reach and that we can actually monitor, what's going to be most appropriate for the client's ability to manage and monitor, and what is the research saying is the best that we can aim for, and if that best isn't going to be suitable for those other reasons, what's the next best? And that's where we might actually come up with something different to the Roho is actually like a gel cushion. But if we're going to come up with something different to whatever the referral has said, we want to feel really confident to actually back ourselves and explain that. So when the nurse comes out and goes, how come you didn't put a Roho in? We can just actually really clearly unpack our decision making based on those different factors. Yep, the research says that air is really good. And I'm definitely able to set it up when there's a client that's suitable. But in this case, it wasn't suitable because the person only has funding for me to come back once a fortnight, and they weren't able to actually demonstrate that they could set up the Roho appropriately and maintain that. And there was just too high a risk that it would be too difficult and they wouldn't use it at all. So that's why we've gone for a deep contour J cushion or something that's as high level as possible. And we've really reinforced the need to reposition. And we're going to see how that goes instead. So you can see how once you've thought through those different pillars, you can be more confident in your clinical reasoning and be able to explain it to others and explain the choices that you make, especially maybe when it's different to whatever that original request was. So for the try this, what we've got for the freebie version is that there is an evidence-based practice guide, an example. I think it is actually using a pressure cushion in my learning library. So you can actually go through and see what are those 4 pillars again and what are the aspects that go into that for a particular example. There's also sometimes, which I didn't touch on in that example, but another part of this is being able to, when there is research evidence, being able to read it and do some sort of basic critique to understand what you're reading and know, is this actually good quality? Does it apply to my setting? So at uni, we're taught to use the critique forms like the CASP, the McMasters that are quite long and sometimes a bit intimidating, scary, maybe traumatized from trying to go through a statistics course at uni. No, I'm not going to use those again. What I've come up with instead is just a simplified critique form that really is just getting you focused on the practical aspects of who wrote this, when was it written, how relevant is it to the clients that I'm working with, so that you don't skip that process of critique, thinking about research like altogether because it just seems too much. You can at least do a stop, think and pause before you launch straight into, oh, yep, that looks like good evidence. I'll start using that to guide my practice. There's some basic level of critique that you should be doing first. So you can access all that in my free learning library. Now, if you go a bit further and you become a paid member, what you get is more detail than that. So you'll get access to an on-demand workshop on how to actually find and use research evidence. Lots of practical examples. I show you how to do a basic database search, how to actually come up with the research question that you're looking for in the first place. And then also the big thing is that you get access to my Journal Club library. So whether you're a member of my student membership connector or the full membership alliance, or if you just want to be a bit of an OT nerd and just do the Journal Club, you can sign up to that separately, but you get access to a whole library of Journal Club sessions. There's about 20 recordings in there now and 5 new live sessions every 12 months or every year. And my journal club's a bit different. So it's not just me going through a critique form. I do a whirlwind. This is a summary of the article, the key points you need to know. I do teach you a little bit of a research fundamental tip, just to slowly plant little seeds to help you understand what you're reading. But the half hour of the session at the end is really focused on discussion questions where we think about, this is what we read in the article. How does it apply to our everyday practice? What are some of the challenges that we see in implementing what they say we should be doing? What are we all currently doing and what are some ways to overcome that? So definitely worth checking out if you're looking at maybe upskilling in terms of the way that you're using research evidence. The next one we've got is connect and collaborate. So this is all about honing your skills in effective communication, interpersonal interactions, and rapport building. So it's exploring the essentials of forming therapeutic relationships, not just with your clients and their families and carers, but also how you interact with your fellow health professionals, because that can really make a big difference in terms of the outcomes that we can achieve for our clients. So the story behind this for maybe when that foundation is missing is that you're an OT seeing Marge in the community. So she's an NDIS participant with MS and you've been working with her on fatigue and sleep management. She mentions to you that she's also seeing a physio, but you don't really ask any more about this. And then after a few fortnightly visits, you find Marge hasn't been implementing any of the strategies that you've suggested in your sessions. She's not keeping the homework diary to help her progress with finding more strategies. And she's actually just appears really exhausted even before, like, right at the start of your sessions. when you stop and think about why, maybe discuss it with your supervisor or reflect on it yourself, ask Marge some more questions about, okay, how come this isn't working? What you might discover is that it's actually your lack of that multidisciplinary approach to practice that's leading Marge to feel confused, overwhelmed, exhausted, and really just not making progress. So it could be because you discover she's exhausted in your sessions because they happen the day after her physio session. And there's no sort of time for recovery in between that. You find that she's confused because the physio is telling her to exercise and you're telling her to rest as part of your energy management education. And then she's overwhelmed because the physio has also given her homework to complete and she can't decide which is more important to prioritize. Do I do the physio homework? Do I do that OT's diary? And in the end, she ends up doing neither because it's just too overwhelming to decide. So if we rethink that and really intentionally go in with a multidisciplinary approach to our practice, then we can actually change those client outcomes. So what good looks like is when you're actually thinking collaboratively to achieve the best client outcomes. So it could be that at this time, the switch is that as soon as you hear there's a physio involved, you ask for permission to speak with them. So you explain what that conversation will achieve and promise to report back to her on the outcome as well. So it's not just making a decision that, yes, I need to go talk to the physio. Often Marge will need to use her funding to cover that conversation. So we need to be really intentional about what that conversation will involve and make sure that Marge can see the value that we're going to have from it as well. So if we do have that conversation, this is what we could achieve. We could maybe modify the appointment schedule so that we know that there's at least 1 day gap between the OT and the physio session to help manage that fatigue. We might agree, okay, there needs to be a bit of a shared message regarding exercise and how it will actually fit into her routine. So she's not confused about whether she should be doing it or not doing it. When she could actually be doing it, that still lines up with the recommendations we're making as an OT about her energy conservation strategies. And in terms of the homework, we can streamline that so that instead of her thinking she's got a physio journal of homework to keep, of reps and things that she's done, plus an OT journal, can we combine that where she's actually just keeping a little bit more of a record of her day so she doesn't feel like she's got twice as much work? So that hopefully all those issues that were maybe holding Marge back from being able to implement the strategies that we're talking about becomes a little bit more achievable and she's not getting mixed messages. It's on the same page. And that could all come just from one very productive but well planned out conversation and hopefully another health professional who's equally invested in that collaborative working. Okay, and then the try this tip for those that would like to maybe work on building their multidisciplinary skills. And what I will also say, like I said at the start, this foundation is all about how we interact with clients as well. So that was just an example of interacting with health professionals. But a lot of my content, resources is about how we interact with clients, how we build rapport, how we feel more comfortable communicating with clients and really understanding their needs and tailoring our approach to work with different types of clients. But just as a freebie example for this one, we are focusing more on that multidisciplinary team approach. So in the learning library, you can access a template with an example and a recorded tutorial on clinical handover. So if we're going to be working effectively with other health professions, big part of that is just having efficient conversations because everybody's short on time, but making sure that you're not waffling, making sure you're not missing any key points. And the ISBAR framework is one way that you can actually have those conversations. So you can check out that template and tutorial where I go through what that actually involves. If you're going further and you're becoming a paid member of the Alliance or one of the Connector memberships as well, you will actually get access not just to my monthly live workshops, but to some of my NDIS courses as well. So I do have a course where there is a section where we talk about multidisciplinary approach to practice. So it was a recent webinar that I did, and I've come up with a worksheet which can help you actually justify to your clients, okay, this is the value that we're actually going to achieve. If you let me speak to your physio, this is what I hope to achieve. And this is what I'm going to report back to you. So just again, sometimes that can be a barrier. People say, oh, look, yeah, that sounds great, but the clients won't agree to fund that. Sometimes it's just stopping and thinking about how good a job have I done at trying to explain that value. So that resource could be helpful for there. And then again, there's an on-demand workshop on multidisciplinary practice, which I actually presented in conjunction with a speech pathologist to really show some really practical examples of the value of when we work together with other health professions. Okay, next one we're up to is be an OT detective. So this is where you're elevating your skills in gathering comprehensive client information. So you're improving your interview skills, observation skills, ability to analyze an activity, that activity analysis, which is OT 101, and just assessing standardized assessments as well that will actually help you to identify clearly what the issue is so that you can be more targeted and effective in your therapy sessions. So a little bit of a story of maybe what it could look like if you're actually not putting enough attention to detail in terms of your information gathering processes and not really being that OT detective. So it could be that you're a community aged care OT and you receive a new referral to see Norma, who's having difficulty with showering. This is often due to decreased mobility, poor environmental setup. So you come to the initial appointment with a shower chair and tape measure, ready to go. You're ready to draw up some modifications, put in a grab rail, whatever it is that you need. So you just go in there, you ask a few questions, confirm that Norma feels unsteady and nervous when she's standing to shower. So you leave her the shower chair, you measure up for the grab rail for her shower recess. And then when you visit 4 weeks later to see how Norma's going with everything, that her shower chair is actually buried in the laundry under some clothes. She hasn't been using it at all. Instead, she's just gone back to having an occasional sponge wash every few days. So in this case, because you weren't doing that sort of information gathering, being a really thorough OT detective, there's been some incorrect assumptions. You made the assumption that her impaired mobility was the only barrier to showering because it was the most obvious one and what we typically would expect to see. The other mistake that you made was to rely on interview alone because it's quick. Sometimes the clients know themselves really well, and this is actually enough. But we did 4 years of OT for a reason, and it's more than just interviewing. So we can skillfully ask others and look for discrepancies between the clients and the carer reports, and we can question why that may be. But so often, actually, what we need to do is observe the functional issue ourselves, and that will actually help us work out how we can solve it. So, yeah, in this case, the outcome wasn't great for Norma because we just did a superficial information gathering process. But what could good look like if we're actually focused on, okay, have I done a good job to really identify the issue by being that really good OT detective? What good looks like is you actually get all the pieces of the puzzle. So what you do is you ask Norma what aspect of showering is difficult for her, but you also ask, can I speak with your daughter as well, just to double check and gather some further information? And when you do that, Norma's daughter reports that her mum's best friend had slipped in the shower 2 months ago and fractured a hip. And ever since then, Norma's been really anxious about showering by herself, but Norma was a bit embarrassed and didn't actually mention that to you. So what you do is you actually do a simulation of Norma's ability to shower as well. So physically get her to step through it with you, maybe not fully in the shower, but like a dry run. And you can see even in that, she's actually really heavily relying on holding the taps to transfer in. So what you decide to do is prescribe a transfer bench instead of the shower chair because that eliminates the need for her to step over that hole, which was really what's worrying her. So you spend some time showing her, how to use it, where to set it up, do some practice runs as well. So by the end, she actually is, okay, I can do this. And she's just relieved that she doesn't have to step over that hole, which was really worrying her. What you can also do is you take a video to show Norma's daughter, and she's happy to do a little bit more practice runs with her mum as well when you're not there, just to help build her confidence. When you visit 4 weeks later this time, she proudly tells you that she's gone back to showering every day because you've addressed more than just the obvious physical issue that was there. So hopefully what that example showed you is that by doing that OT detective work, we're considering all the contributing factors that could be impacting on the functional issue that the person is having, rather than just jumping to conclusions, making assumptions based on maybe what we've seen happen for other clients. And that can be really easy to do when we're in fast-paced environments when we don't really have time. We just jump to the easy solution. This is likely to be the issue. Let's go with that. But sometimes it doesn't need to be a lot of extra time to actually gather that extra information if we're intentional about how we do it. And part of that is also just engaging the person's support network as well in the process, because instead of just having the information coming directly from the client, they may be able to offer us some new directions of what we actually need to explore as well. So the try this freebie for this one. So if you actually thought, oh, that was a helpful example to actually go through what the information gathering might do, you can actually take it a little bit further. I've got a webinar, which is available on my YouTube channel for free, where I go through this scenario, pretty similar scenario, I think, in a little bit more detail and depth, really focusing on what those OT core skills are and how we need to ask more questions so that we can really give the right solutions. And then if you're one of the paid members as part of the Alliance, there's lots of different workshop recordings already available on being an OT OT detective. So just one of them there as an example is one on standardized assessments and how we can use them to guide our practice. There's also access to using standardized assessments for functional capacity assessments, which is one of the modules from my big course you can access for free if you're a member as well. And there's lots of other things where I talk about like the non-standardized assessments, such as doing functional cognitive type assessments in both the Alliance and Connector memberships as well. So lots to think about and start using straight away. Number 6 is to solve problems, change lives. And this is the core of what we do, the actual doing part of the therapy part of OT, where we're starting to find ways to help our clients overcome their functional barriers. So what I do is I keep it really focused on core skills that seem to go across, doesn't really matter what OT caseload you work in. Those sort of core therapy skills are there, such as prescribing assistive technology, some sort of self-care retraining, environmental modifications, so not necessarily home mods, but even just changing the sensory environment as well. Report writing comes into this because I think in a lot of the caseloads that we're working in, being able to write a decent report is almost becoming like our therapy service provision. We also talk about in this one, like being able to provide effective client education, and sort of all this is really focused in on solving problems to change our clients' lives. So, story about maybe when this foundation is missing. So this could be that you're a hospital OT working on the respiratory ward, you receive a new referral to see John, who's admitted with exacerbation of his COPD. And while you're doing your initial interview, you notice that there's a hand splint on the bedside table. And when you ask what that's for, he goes, "Oh, I broke my wrist a couple of weeks ago. I was told to wear it, but it's just annoying. I'm not going to wear it." So you assume, okay, doctors have probably been onto that. So I won't ask any more questions. I'm just going to keep going on with my discharge planning. So you don't really even think about making adjustments for any potential upper limb restrictions when you're practicing transfers. And suddenly he starts to say, "Oh, my arm pain is getting worse." And then now suddenly he can't actually even do some simple meal prep, which was really what he was aiming for, to be able to go home once sort of the breathlessness resolved. He's actually now got more wrist pain, and that's actually a new barrier to discharge. So in this case, that tiny detail that was missing actually impacted the rest of what we were doing. So I think when we have a holistic sort of understanding of all the different types of OT intervention, so assistive technology, upper limb management, client education, then even if it's not the area that we're specialized in, if we just have a bit of awareness of what other things maybe fit under an OT role or where we could go approach another OT for guidance, it can really make an impact on the type of service quality that we can provide. So in this case, how secondary diagnoses may impact our therapy plan and how holistic proactive care can actually optimize outcomes. So I'll give you an example, whereas if we actually did act on what we noticed because we felt more confident in maybe the skills that we had around upper limb management and what's involved with splints and all that side of things, then maybe the outcome would be different. So an example of that is you actually know that hand splits are usually required for more than 2 weeks after a fracture. So you decide to not just let it go, you ask some more questions about, okay, what instructions did the hand therapist give him? But maybe he's still a little bit vague on the details. But when you have a look yourself, you notice that his hand's actually quite swollen. He's actually not using it to try and feed himself his lunch. And you're actually worried that, okay, that hand function now is actually going to become a problem for impacting on his discharge, because it's going to impact his ability to do his self-care and to do sort of those basic meal prep that he needs to be able to do to go home if he's living by himself. So even though the nurse say, "Oh no, he's managing fine on the ward," maybe because he's not using that arm at all, you think, okay, with his permission, you're going to actually contact the hand therapy team, and they actually come and see him on the ward and they adjust the splint. So suddenly it is comfortable now and he can wear it, which is actually going to be helpful for his recovery. They also maybe reinforce the instructions around that he's not allowed to weight bear through that arm, and works with you maybe to come up with the one-handed strategies that are going to be effective for him while he's still wearing the splint. And because you looked into a little bit more, you can flag early with the social worker that, yep, even though his COPD is recovering and he's independent of his self-care, there's something extra that's also impacting his function. It's making it more difficult, which is the hand injury, and could he actually access some services when he goes home to support him with that? So in this case, you use your core OT skills of some hand therapy basics to identify some potential issues. And then instead of you trying to like, "Oh, okay, yep, I'll deal with this hand therapy thing as well," because definitely the whole idea of this foundation isn't that we need to be an expert in every single area of OT practice. What you can do instead is that you can identify, okay, this is probably outside of my scope to really adjust what his issue is with his hand therapy, but it's impacting my role in his discharge planning. I'm going to reach out to the hand therapist and get them to give us some advice on that. So that's just one way where, feeling more confident and rounded in terms of all the different OT skills that we might need to use can actually help us deliver a better service. So the try this sort of freebie and members option. So there's lots of different Ask Me Anything webinars just on core OT skills and more sort of specific niche areas in the learning library. And I'm not an expert on everything. So what I do is I get people that are experts to come in and share their knowledge and information with everyone. So for example, there's some webinars on prescribing AC and how our role interacts with speech pathologists. There's one on pressure care mattresses and electric adjustable beds. Lots of resources on NDIS report writing as well. And if you're a member of the Alliance and also part of the Connector one as well, then I have recently added some on-demand workshops on basic upper limb assessments and basic hand therapy skills so that you just feel a little bit more confident that if there is an issue, you can do a basic screen and work out, oh yeah, this could be a bit of a problem. Let me reach out for a little bit of help rather than just skimming over it and not wanting to ask more questions because you don't feel confident to do anything about it. There are things that you can do about it, and it just starts with having a little bit more confidence and awareness of what are the full scope of OTs and who can you ask for help. So we're slowly moving on past the clinical now, moving on to Foundation 7, which is Teach and Transform. And often this comes once you're feeling really confident with your clinical skills and you're looking for sort of that next level. But you can definitely do some of this teaching, transforming sort of foundation while you're still developing your own clinical skills. So basically, this is where you're embracing your inner teacher and you're passing on your knowledge and skills to fellow OTs and OT students as well. So you can gain confidence in providing supervision, teaching students, mentoring, leading others, and really extending your impact through providing team education and external training. Bit of an example of maybe where we don't really think about the depth needed to do this teaching skill. We just look surface level. So it could be that you're an NDIS sole trader and used to support OT students when you're a hospital OT. So you decide to make an offer for a fourth year student placement without really thinking through the logistics. So they come, then you end up stressed because the student had lots of questions before they started. It took you hours to answer their emails, prepare some resources when they started as well. Turns out they didn't have a car, so you needed to alter your schedule to be able to pick them up for home visits. And you actually felt guilty that, okay, I really need to get this report done. They're just going to be sitting there for 4 hours. And you try to really spend more of your time coming up with ideas to keep them busy. Because that mentality is that if they're not with me watching something, doing something, that they're not actually learning. So basically in this situation, what's happened is that you've just put your trust into winging it instead of really thinking through the depth that's needed to do a teaching role really well. And what it's resulted in is that it's not efficient. You probably maybe won't go ahead and offer another student placement because that lack of preparation has just meant that it was a bit of a time-consuming disaster for you in terms of your productivity maybe. The other mistake maybe is that you're trying to focus on quantity rather than quality. So that sort of mentality of thinking that the student needs to be with me all the time, seeing clients doing things for them to be learning. Often what we really need to be doing is allowing some more time for them to consolidate their skills between seeing clients, because once they're new grads, they often don't have time for that. But if we can give them that time when they're students, we don't need to feel guilty that they're going to be bored. If we can give them the right prompts and scaffolding, that can actually just be really helpful time for their reflection and planning so they can do a better job with fewer clients rather than feeling that they have to see everyone that you're seeing. And I think when we're, not really planning things through, trying to get the student to follow us to see everything, things just end up harder than they should be. And like I said before, it generally results in we decide not to offer another student placement. So what good could actually look like instead? Maybe this time you spend a little bit more time with your planning so that you know that hosting a student placement will look very different when you're a sole trader in the community versus when you're a hospital OT and maybe had a big team around you, lots of patients to see all the time. So what you actually do is invest in a little bit more planning. So you consider the logistics, maybe you start with a shorter placement to do a bit of a test run and to help work out, okay, what sort of resources am I likely going to need to go forward so I'm not having to do that sort of on the fly with a student that's here for a very long time. Might be that you decide to outsource and invest in some of my done for you student resources as well. And even trying to look at some ways that you can help give the students some guided self-directed learning activities. I've got plenty of resources for that as well, so you don't have to come up with it yourself. So it's one way that you can think about, okay, how can I think smarter, not harder, to be able to do this, provide this foundational skill really well. Again, this is just one example, but in this case, good preparation hopefully meant lower stress. You didn't underestimate the logistics, and you're actually allowing some downtime for the students. You moved on from feeling that they needed to see a client with you all the time to be learning, and maybe did some of your own upskilling in terms of student supervision, or often like experienced OT supervisors, if you've supervised students before, you know this, but it's just that reminder. And that's definitely something that I talk about in some of my membership content as well, about how to best support students, and almost just giving you the permission that they don't need to be seeing somebody with you all the time, all day, to be able to be learning. And in fact, if we take away some of that face-to-face time and give them some more reflection, planning time, often their learning is much better. The other part of this teaching transforming, that was just a very specific student placement example, but it's also thinking about if you're maybe a supervisor to other OTs, how can you work on developing your supervision skills? Maybe for a supervisor that's also a line manager, how can you differentiate between what you're delivering to your supervisees to do a really good job with that? And the other part of this is also if you're doing formal education. So someone like me that does lots of webinars, if you wanted to actually work on how to deliver webinars either for your own team or for externally, but you're like, I'm not really sure how to structure it, what the purpose will be, how to promote it to other people as well, then that sort of can fit into this and something that I do help my members with. So the try this option, the freebie one is if student placements is something you're interested in and you're like, I'm like that OT that maybe wouldn't have actually planned things out, I do have a guide, which is Am I Ready to Host an Allied Health Student Clinical Placement? Designed with sole traders, small providers in mind as well, about some of those logistics to think through before you just go and make an offer. And for my members, we take that a little bit further with lots of really practical examples. So I've got an on-demand workshop where we actually spend time talking you through how you can create your own student resource kit. Or you could skip that and maybe go ahead and purchase a discounted link to one of my student resources kit that's already done for you. And my members can also access a free quarterly Zoom drop-in session where we talk specifically about student placements. And if anything really good comes up in that's not confidential, then sometimes there's recordings available of those as well. Next, we've got Raise the Bar, and this is the final one, which is again moving beyond those clinical skills. Often once OTs have been working for a little while, they're starting to look for something more to really help them with that career fulfillment. But again, doesn't need to wait until you're an OT with 5-10 years experience. Some of these things you might already be looking to start including even as a new grad into your practice. So this is all about raising your impact and showcasing the awesomeness of OT. So it could be where you're doing quality improvement, maybe where you're stepping up and joining associations and committees. You could be taking the stage at conferences and presenting your work. And it could even be nowadays, very much having a powerful social media presence can be really important for raising the profile of OT if we're doing it well. So when this foundation is missing, this is just an example of maybe what could be happening for you. You've been a hospital OT for 10 years, maybe you've been a senior OT role for 3 years, and you're starting to feel a little bit bored in your role. So you're interested in applying for a project management role that's come up in the hospital, but you're not sure if it's the right pathway for you or whether you'd actually have the ability to do the role. So you just be like, I won't apply. You keep just doing your clinical OT work, but some days it's hard to maintain your enthusiasm. You're not really sure how much longer you can do this for, but there's that block between having that confidence or direction in terms of what's next, what's after this. So in this case, when you're doing things like that, you're almost holding yourself and the world back, because if OTs actually do take that plunge and join committees beyond OT, create powerful social media presences, then the OT often benefits from the value of the OT perspective, particularly when we're in like project management roles or maybe contributing to executive committees about strategic decision making. That OT approach is really holistic, client-centered, and can really add lots of value. So that's why I put maybe a bit dramatic, like holding the world back. You're holding yourself back from maybe taking that next step to something that you could feel more fulfilled in. But also, yeah, we can offer a lot more to the world as well when we do step up a bit more. So in these situations, maybe some of the barriers were that you didn't really seek that outside opinion to maybe help overcome that maybe imposter syndrome or that lack of confidence to just give it a go with that applying for that project role. And like I said before, the outcome is that others won't get to really appreciate the true value of OT if we always just stay purely in OT niches. If we can expand beyond our day-to-day clinical and look for other avenues, then that's where it can be really powerful. So what good could it look like? Maybe this time instead, I'm going to do something different. So you regularly engage in mentoring, come to the realization that long term, you'd like to use your OT skills in a non-clinical way. So you start to explore opportunities within the OT department to develop skills and see what areas you might be interested in. And your manager is actually really keen to know that you're excited to do something beyond clinical. So they give you some approval to be one of the OT reps on a new patient experience project that's being led by the hospital executive committee. And then this is your first taste of it. You're like, I actually do really love this non-clinical work. Started to learn lots about the higher level governance processes that happen within a hospital, and it's not scaring me away. So I know this could actually be for me. And then next time when a new project management role comes up in the hospital, you're actually a bit more confident that, yeah, I actually really would like this. And you feel confident that you'll be able to answer some of the questions because you have some of that background knowledge about how committees work in a hospital setting. So this time you apply, you get that sort of secondment role, and you start using your OT skills and perspective in a different way. So what's actually helped you to achieve this is that you've been maybe a little bit more purposeful with your career planning in terms of, yes, I can do something beyond clinical and I'm interested in that more management pathway, or is it more research focused or education focused? It's actually being really purposeful about that. That can help you have the confidence to do something beyond clinical. The other deciding factor here was the small steps. So you don't have to launch straight into going from nothing, zero experience to applying for that project role. Nothing saying that you can't either, but if to give you that confidence, if you are someone that you think wouldn't take that leap, look for those little opportunities. So in this case, it was just joining a committee and being part of a smaller committee, not the whole project lead. And in this case, backing yourself as well. I think when you're clear on both of these things, you've maybe had a few little taster steps along the way, you know where you're heading for and that it's the right move for you, you can feel more confident to back yourself. And if you've got a little cheerleader on the way, so whether it's your manager, other colleagues, even outside OT, then that can be really helpful for you to take that leap. And then the final try this freebie and member resources is that, like I said before, that was an example around maybe stepping up into a different sort of management type role. Another way you could actually really build your skills in this area is through quality improvement and research and even just presenting at conferences. So a bit of a freebie option is if maybe that's your first little step is to just put together a poster presentation at a conference, then there's an example of the elements that you could put into a poster to hopefully make that look a little bit less daunting as well. So you can get that from the Learning Library. Then for my members, so lots of on-demand workshops talking about this, but just as some examples, there's one that I've done recently where I had some guest presenters come in and we talked through the different career pathways in terms of our journeys of specializing in a management role, in a research role, and an education role to think about, is that the type of role for you? So that could be something you're interested in. Like I said before, another part of this foundation is maybe elevating the profile of OT through social media. And my favorite platform at the moment is LinkedIn. So I have a workshop where we actually go through what are some key tips for maybe building your own profile on LinkedIn. And also in terms of sometimes the hesitation is around the APRA advertising rules. So I have an APRA advertising rules expert that came in and actually helped answer some of those questions as well as part of that workshop. So lots of different practical ways where if you're thinking, yep, I'm at this part of my OT journey, they might actually be helpful for really getting that clarity in terms of where to next for you. So we have made it through to the end of those 8 foundations of OT success. Hopefully there was something helpful in there. Maybe there was one standout take-home message or aha moment that you think, actually, that's really what I would like to focus on next. Just as a bit of a recap, remember these foundations of OT success, there's 8 different foundations, and there really are, I believe, the core professional and clinical skills that you need to be happy, competent, and confident as an OT. And hopefully some of those little stories of when they're missing and when we actually take the time to embed them in our practice, that's where you can see the difference, not just in the client outcomes, but then also our job satisfaction as well. If you wanted to think, hey, yeah, there's lots of different things I can focus in on, not really sure where to start, a little bit of a big ultimate try this is I do have a self-assessment quiz, and I ran it for the first time last OT week, really quite comprehensive one. And I think time demands, if possible, has become even shorter for OTs in general. So I've now also got the quick fire version, which is 15 questions. So basically, it's a Google form. It's not perfect. It is going to be modified now with the explosion of AI. We will come up with a different version, hopefully by next OT week, not via Google Forms, but something a little bit more conversational based as well. But basically, just at the moment, click on the link to whichever you want, the short version or the comprehensive version. If you add your emails at the start, that will actually send you your results if you wanted to actually do a bit of a track and do this every 6 months. Basically, when you actually put in your results, and it goes through the 8 different foundations and gives you some things to think about in terms of, am I doing this well or not? And then if there's any things that you've ticked and it's like, maybe you're not doing the best job, when you click submit, stick around and actually read the answers that come up, because I share some helpful examples or suggestions for maybe where you can access some more resources to help you work on that particular skill that you identified. So have a look through that. Hopefully that might give you a bit of a starting point. You can also access this via my learning library. If you lose this webinar and can't come back like, where is it? The learning library will have a lot of these really important things in here. And just to wrap up, a few little deals that are happening in OT week. So I've mentioned all the way through, there's lots of things available in my free stuff, but it'll probably blow your mind how much stuff is available in my Your OT Tutor Alliance membership. So at the moment, it's normally $49 per month, but at the moment you can save 20% and sign up for $39 during OT week. Basically what you get is access to monthly online workshop, and I gave you some examples throughout that. You also get a monthly Q&A session. The journal club, there's 5 live sessions per year, plus the library of, I think we're up to about 20 recordings. Twice a month we have office hours where you can just drop into a Zoom room and work alongside another OT to vent, share a win, ask a question. Lots of on-demand content. So all those workshops that I've ever presented, all those Q&As you can access on demand, and also some of my NGIS courses and webinars that I've recently run. Not everything. The ones that aren't available fully as part of the membership, you actually can access a discount to though. I've also got what I call Claire's recommendation. So I often come across stuff that's just really great learning content on the internet, and it's freely available. People just don't know it exists. So what I do is actually I add it to my list. So if I come across some great stroke resources, it's now in a list of, this is where you can find some information about that. So it's not just my content that you can access, but it's almost like a bit of a curated list of some of the really good quality education that's out there on the internet, which sometimes you're just not lucky enough to stumble across. And then also, like I said, you do get a one-to-one session, half-hour session with me. I think I say 20 minutes, but they always go a little bit more. So I usually say half an hour. You get that freely included, or if you wanted, like I said, that CPD discounted session, you get that a little bit cheaper than if you weren't a member. So that's something I think you definitely should check out. But also maybe if you're a new grad watching this thinking that's a lot, maybe I don't need that just yet, but I really liked some of the webinar examples I gave that were really just focused in on core OT skills. What you could consider is the connector. So I've said student membership there because it was written with students in mind, but also perfect for new grads and maybe even some international OTs that really just want to understand, what does core OT look like in an Australian setting. So that includes about a 45-minute weekly live tutorial. And of course, they're recorded and then become available on demand. There's a monthly Q&A. So one of those sessions each month is a Q&A. I always come up with lots of worksheets, resources, case studies as part of that to really help you connect the dots. So it's not just like another lecture maybe that you get at uni with all the theory, really practical case studies and worksheets to help you work through the clinical reasoning. That library is growing, so the connector's only been available since January 2025, but if you can do the maths and add up one tutorial every week, you're going to be accessing about 30 on-demand options by the time you sign up around now. And there is some access to NGIS courses as well, depending on whether you go for the monthly connector membership or the annual one. But at the moment, a little bit of a discount on that as well. Normally $25 per month. If you see this and email me, say, hey, Claire, I'm interested in the connector, let me know and I'll give you that discounted $20 per month as well. And just to get started, so maybe if you're watching this, just remember that for the next 5 days to celebrate OT week, I'm releasing some of my webinars that are usually only available to my Connector and Alliance members just for 24 hours via my YouTube channel. So each day, Monday to Friday, there'll be 2 new webinars. So the one you're watching is the one for Monday alongside another one. There'll be 2 new ones each day, but they're only live for 24 hours. If you would like to access them longer than that, say you missed the window for something you're really interested in, you're able to actually access all 10 of them for $20 with no expiry in my learning management system. So that'll be available on the OT Week landing page. Wherever you're watching this, there'll be a link somewhere where you can go in and find out and sign up for that. If you're not quite ready, maybe for a full membership yet, but you think this could be really helpful, some of those topics were helpful, then that could be a nice affordable starting point for you. Now, if you do have any questions, you're welcome to reach out and get in touch. If you'd like to find out more about the learning management system, how all those different memberships are structured, check wherever you're watching this, check down in the text area. I'll have some links to some other recordings where I've actually given a tour of the learning management system so you can see for yourself the detail that's sort of involved and the amount of content that's involved. I keep it the price as low as I can because I want it to be accessible as possible, not because there's not a lot of value. There's way more value. People always tell me it needs to be much more expensive, but I just want people to be able to access this and really prioritize learning their core OT skills and developing those further. If you're watching this and you need to get in touch with me, you're welcome to email me directly. You can drop in a message via the website. And if you want to see what else I've got coming up in terms of live sessions, you can check out my link tree. And I'll again have all the links down below for you and you can see what I've got coming up. Also follow me on my socials. LinkedIn is where I post every day. You can also catch me occasionally on Instagram and Facebook as well. And there'll be some new other platforms that I'll be joining shortly. YouTube channel, hopefully that's where you're watching this. That's definitely worth subscribing to because there's always little short free videos and some longer ones, longer webinars that join that as well. But thanks for sticking through to the end of this webinar. I hope something in there was helpful and that you're feeling a little bit more inspired to just go back to being a good OT who loves what you do. But I'll see you next time.